You know that woman whose confidence used to threaten you? Here's the truth. That intense reaction isn't about her. It's about the fierce, uncompromising part of yourself you learned to hide years ago. This is called shadow projection, and understanding it will transform every relationship in your life. But here's what's going to challenge everything you think you know about difficult people. What if the people who trigger you most aren't random irritations, but precise psychological guidance? What if your strongest reactions are actually your unconscious mind's way of showing you exactly which parts of yourself you need to reclaim to become whole? By the end of this journey, you'll look at that same confident woman and every person who's ever triggered you with completely different eyes. Not as threats to avoid, but as teachers pointing you home to yourself. So let's start with that moment when she walks into the room and you feel that familiar discomfort rising. What's really happening in that instant? You know that woman whose confidence used to threaten you? Here's what's really happening in that moment of instant discomfort. Your nervous system is actually recognizing something, not about her, but about you. It's detecting a part of your own personality that you've buried so deep, you've forgotten it exists. Carl Jung called this shadow projection, and it's one of the most powerful forces shaping your relationships. Think about it. Why doesn't everyone react to her the same way you do? Why does her boldness make your skin crawl while others admire her? The answer lies in what Jung discovered about the human psyche. Here's the paradigm shift that changes everything. Your strongest reactions to other people are never really about them. They're about the parts of yourself you've learned to deny, repress, or hide. That woman's unapologetic confidence? It's triggering you because somewhere inside you have that same fierce authenticity, but you learned it wasn't safe to show it. Jung observed that we unconsciously project our own disowned traits onto others, then react with intense emotion to what we see. It's like your psyche is holding up a mirror, showing you exactly what you've been refusing to acknowledge about yourself. The more intense your reaction, the more significant the disowned trait. So here's the uncomfortable question. What if every person who triggers you is actually revealing a hidden part of your own potential? What if your reactions aren't random emotions, but precise psychological guidance pointing you toward the very qualities you need to reclaim? The truth is, understanding shadow projection is just the beginning. Because once you realize that your triggers are mirrors, you'll start to wonder, how did these parts of yourself get buried in the first place? And that's where the real story begins, in the hidden architecture of how we learn to betray ourselves. So how exactly do parts of ourselves get buried so deep that we project them onto others? The answer takes us back to childhood, where every one of us learned a devastating lesson. To be loved, we must hide who we really are. This is where your shadow was born. Not in darkness, but in the very act of trying to be good enough. Picture a 5-year-old girl who's naturally bold and assertive. She speaks her mind, takes up space, demands attention. Then one day she's told she's too much, bossy, or selfish. In that moment, Jung would say, a piece of her authentic self gets split off and buried in what he called the personal shadow. She learns that to belong, she must betray herself. But here's what most people don't understand about shadow work. We don't just repress our darkness, we repress our light. Jung recognized that we often bury our most powerful qualities because they threaten others or don't fit our family's expectations. That confident woman who triggers you, she's not just reflecting your buried assertiveness, she's reflecting what Jung called your golden shadow, the magnificent parts of yourself you learned were dangerous to show. Your personal shadow wasn't created in isolation. Cultural norms, family dynamics, even attachment theory research shows us how early relationships literally shape what we learn to hide. Society has collective agreements about what's acceptable, and anything that doesn't fit gets pushed into the collective unconscious. We all become unconscious participants in each other's self-betrayal. This is why that woman's confidence feels like a personal attack. Because it is. Not an attack from her, but from your own disowned power demanding to be seen. Your shadow contains both your repressed darkness and your denied brilliance. And every time you encounter someone living the qualities you've buried, your psyche rebels. The stage is set for projection, and most people never realize they're just fighting with themselves. Now that you understand how your shadow formed, let's uncover the psychological machinery that makes you hate in others what you deny in yourself. Jung discovered that projection isn't random. It's your psyche's desperate attempt to show you what you've lost. When you see that confident woman and feel threatened, you're not seeing her clearly at all. You're seeing your own disowned power reflected back at you, and your ego is fighting for its life. Here's how the projection machine actually works. Your unconscious mind takes the qualities you've buried, that fierce authenticity, that unapologetic boldness, and attributes them to others. It's a psychological defense mechanism that Jung called making the unconscious conscious through the other. The school bully who targets the confident kid, he's not really attacking the child's confidence. He's attacking his own buried self-worth that he sees reflected in his victim. The intensity of your reaction is the clue. When someone triggers mild annoyance, that's just a preference. But when someone makes your blood boil, when their very existence feels like a personal affront, that's your shadow speaking. Jung observed that we experience our projections as absolutely true, even though they're distortions. That woman's confidence doesn't just seem threatening to you. It feels like an objective fact about her character. This is why shadow projection is so exhausting. You're constantly fighting battles that aren't really about the other person. You're defending against qualities that live inside you, judging behaviors that mirror your own disowned traits. Research shows this creates a vicious cycle. The more you resist acknowledging these qualities in yourself, the more intensely you'll project them onto others. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. Projection doesn't just happen between individuals. When entire groups project their collective shadow onto other groups, their fears, their shame, their denied impulses, you get scapegoating on a massive scale. That confident woman who triggers you, she's just one person. But when millions of people simultaneously project the same disowned qualities onto entire populations, you get the foundation for every form of social conflict, prejudice, and injustice in human history. Remember that projection machine we just uncovered? Now imagine it operating not in one person, but in millions simultaneously. Jung called this the collective shadow, the shared repressed aspects of entire societies that get projected onto the other. When your individual discomfort with that confident woman scales up to societal level, you get mass scapegoating. And history is littered with the devastating consequences. Consider the witch hunts of medieval Europe. Entire communities projected their fear of feminine power and sexuality onto women, then burned them alive. Or colonial powers who projected savagery onto indigenous peoples to justify their own brutal exploitation. These weren't random acts of violence, they were collective shadow projection on a massive scale. Jung recognized that societies create others to carry the very traits they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. This isn't just ancient history. Look at modern corporate culture, where systemic failures get projected onto individual scapegoats. Or online mob behavior, where thousands of people simultaneously project their own shame and inadequacy onto public figures who become convenient targets. The individual psychological mechanism you experience with that confident woman becomes weaponized when entire groups do it together. Social media has turned collective shadow projection into a 24/7 phenomenon. Algorithms literally amplify our projections, creating echo chambers where millions of people can validate each other's shadow projections in real time. The same psychological process that makes you uncomfortable around confident individuals now shapes global discourse, political movements, and social conflicts. Here's the terrifying truth. Unacknowledged collective shadows don't just create discomfort, they create enemies. They fuel wars, genocide, systemic oppression, and social division. Every atrocity in human history has been justified by projecting the collective shadow onto a group deemed other. The personal work of shadow integration isn't just about your own healing. It's about preventing collective destruction. So if projection causes so much suffering, both personal and collective, what's the solution? Here's where Jung's insights become truly revolutionary. The answer isn't to fight your shadow or eliminate it. It's to do something that feels completely backwards. Embrace it. Jung called this shadow integration, and it's the most counterintuitive psychological process you'll ever encounter. To find your light, you must first make peace with your darkness. Remember that confident woman who triggered you? Shadow integration means asking a radically different question. Instead of, why is she so threatening? You ask, what part of my own fierce authenticity am I seeing in her that I've been afraid to claim? This isn't positive thinking. It's psychological archaeology. You're literally excavating buried parts of yourself from the shadow. Here's what happens when you reclaim your projections. You get your energy back. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly judge, resist, and fight against people who trigger you. Jung observed that all that energy you've been directing outward in projection is actually your own disowned power trying to return home. When you integrate your shadow, you're not just healing your triggers, you're reclaiming your creative life force. This is the integration paradox that changes everything. When you accept your capacity for selfishness, you become genuinely generous. When you acknowledge your potential for cruelty, you develop real compassion. When you own your hunger for power, you discover authentic strength. Shadow integration doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you a whole person. And whole people don't need to project their darkness onto others. Jung discovered that the shadow contains not just our repressed darkness, but our denied brilliance. That golden shadow we talked about, it holds your unexpressed creativity, your untapped potential, your authentic power. When you stop fighting the parts of yourself you've learned to hide, you unlock what Jung called the treasure hard to attain, your full creative capacity. The very qualities you judge in others become the keys to your own transformation. But here's the profound shift that's coming. When you do this inner work, when you stop projecting your shadow onto others, something magical happens in your relationships. That confident woman who used to threaten you, she becomes a teacher. Your triggers become doorways. Your enemies become mirrors showing you the way back to your own buried power. The question isn't whether shadow integration works, it's whether you're ready to discover who you really are underneath all those projections. Now comes the most profound shift in human relationships. What happens when you stop projecting your shadow onto others? Jung observed that shadow integration doesn't just heal you, it transforms everyone around you. When you withdraw your projections and reclaim your disowned power, you suddenly see people as they actually are, not as carriers of your rejected traits. This is when real intimacy becomes possible. Here's the relationship revolution. When you integrate your shadow, you stop trying to fix other people. That confident woman who used to trigger you, you're no longer fighting her boldness because you've reclaimed your own. You're not trying to dim her light because you've stopped hiding yours. Research shows that projection withdrawal creates what psychologists call differentiation, the ability to be close to someone without losing yourself or trying to change them. But the transformation goes deeper than just stopping projection. When you own your full range of human traits, both light and shadow, you develop what Jung called genuine empathy. You can see others' struggles without judgment because you've accepted your own capacity for those same struggles. Your relationships become mirrors of growth rather than battlegrounds of projection. One person doing their shadow work creates a ripple effect that transforms entire family systems. This isn't just theory. Shadow integration has practical applications. When someone triggers you now, instead of immediately judging them, you pause and ask, what am I seeing in them that I haven't accepted in myself? This simple practice, rooted in Jung's understanding of projection, transforms conflict into curiosity. Your emotional reactions become data about your own unintegrated aspects rather than evidence of others' flaws. When projection stops, something extraordinary emerges. Unconditional love. Not the sentimental kind, but the fierce love that can see someone fully without needing them to be different. Jung understood that this is what he called individuation, becoming whole enough to love others without projecting your unlived life onto them. The confident woman who once threatened you becomes a celebration of the very qualities you've reclaimed in yourself. This is the relationship revolution, seeing others as teachers rather than enemies, mirrors rather than threats. Remember that woman whose confidence used to threaten you? Now you know the truth. She wasn't threatening you. She was reflecting your own buried magnificence. That intense reaction you couldn't explain? It wasn't about her at all. It was your psyche's sophisticated guidance system, pointing you toward the fierce, uncompromising part of yourself you learned to hide years ago. What felt like a threat was actually a gift, your golden shadow calling you home. This changes everything. Every person who triggers you is now a teacher. Every uncomfortable reaction becomes data about your own unintegrated potential. You're no longer a victim of difficult people. You're a conscious participant in your own wholeness. The world just became your classroom for reclaiming who you really are. So here's the question that only makes sense now that you've completed this journey. If your greatest triggers are actually maps to your greatest potential, what magnificent parts of yourself are you ready to stop giving away? Join the community of people who see triggers as teachers, not threats. Subscribe for more revelations that will transform how you see yourself and every relationship in your life. Because once you have eyes to see, the whole world becomes your mirror.